The darkest serial killers in history, 4 stories nobody talks about. When we think of serial killers, the same names always come to mind: Ted Bundy, Jack the Ripper, and others like them. But history holds far more than these. Here are a few names you've probably never heard of. Baba Anuchka, the mysterious healer of Yugoslavia. The protagonist, or rather the anti-hero of our first story, is Anna Dapulgina. But we won't know her by that name. We'll know her by the nickname she earned in the village, Baba Anuchka. In other words, Grandmother Anna. This name came to her like a blessing. It was the embodiment of the love and trust the village people felt for her. But as we will see, that trust was turned into a weapon in the fullest sense of the word. Anna's life began as the story of an ordinary Yugoslav peasant woman. She was young, beautiful, attractive, and well-kept, at least according to the accounts of people from that era. But an event in her 20s changed everything. She entered into a relationship with an Austrian stranger. This man left her in financial difficulty and also transmitted a disease to her. 200 years ago, such an experience for a woman was not merely a personal devastation, it was also a social stigma. From that day forward, Anna withdrew into herself. She didn't want to speak to anyone or even see them. She cut off her relationship with the outside world, and she devoted herself to 2 things: solitude and knowledge. She became fascinated with learning medicine and chemistry. She began studying both traditional and alternative treatment methods: plants, extracts, mixtures, dosages. Over the years she developed herself and learned, becoming a serious expert in this field. But something else happened during this process. Her father wanted to put an end to the young woman's lonely and closed-off life. Anna was forcibly married to a man much older and wealthier than herself. In that era there was no luxury of objection, especially for a woman, and especially under these social conditions. Their marriage was fruitful in a biological sense. 11 children were born, but most of these children lost their lives before reaching adulthood. Her husband followed them before long. Anna found herself in her mid-40s, both widowed and nearly childless. Everything she had labored over for years, everything she had relied upon, had slipped from her hands one by one. Perhaps it was precisely at this point that a quiet anger and resentment toward the world slowly began to take shape within her. But others could not see this at the time and didn't want to see it either. With the property she inherited, she set up her own chemistry laboratory. She began to be known in the village as someone who prepared herbal medicines and remedies. She found solutions for coughs, colds, wounds, and pains. She earned good money from this work. She was respected. She was even very well liked. The villagers began calling her Baba Anuchka, grandmother, the wise old woman, the village's guardian spirit, and this reputation brought her something else of great value: trust, especially the deep and unshakable trust of young women. Women who were victims of their marriages, who received no respect or kindness from their husbands, who could find no way out of their lives, began bringing their grievances to this old woman. Anna listened to them beautifully. She nodded her head. She understood, or so it appeared. When she reached her 80s, she offered these clients a new product: magic water. A small bottle, its contents clear and innocent looking. "Give this to your husband to drink nicely, and your problem will be solved," she said. Her words were simple. She stated them plainly, and for those who wanted to believe, that was enough. This water contained arsenic and various plant toxins that were extremely difficult to detect. The victim, in most cases, slowly died within 1 or 2 weeks. The symptoms resembled a natural illness: weakness, stomach complaints, a general collapse. The medical capabilities of that era were very far from detecting such poisons. Arousing suspicion was difficult, for both knowledge and care went into the matter. Anna ran this business not by chance but in an extremely calculated manner. She obtained each client's victim's height and weight in order to calibrate the correct dose. She approached the work with the precision of a chemist. Too large a dose would accelerate death and arouse suspicion. Too small a dose would be useless. Balance was important, and Anna maintained that balance very well. This service was of course not free either. She demanded a fee ranging from approximately $600 to $3,000 in today's money. If a client was in a position to pay that, she was probably truly desperate, and desperation makes history's most loyal customer base. A fine method of attracting customers: desperation. Estimates vary, but according to the most widely accepted figures, 50 to 150 men lost their lives thanks to Baba Anuchka's magic water. For decades, nobody took this seriously or dared to. The successive deaths of husbands in the village naturally raised suspicions. But when the women behind these deaths faced accusations, they merely shrugged. "I didn't know," they said. "She cast a spell, don't ask us." And this explanation astonishingly worked under the conditions of that era. The beginning of the end came in 1926. A couple who wanted to be rid of a wealthy family member sought Anna's help and received it. The man died. The police moved in as quickly as possible this time, for the death of a wealthy person always attracts greater investigative attention. During questioning, one member of the couple eventually talked and informed on Anna. The other widows still spoke of witchcraft, but now the authorities took a different path. Anna was 91 years old when she was arrested. She was tried in court and sentenced to 15 years in prison. What this sentence effectively meant is unclear. It seemed hardly possible that someone nearly 100 years old could survive harsh prison conditions. 8 years later, due to her severely deteriorating health, she was released. She was 99 years old. She died in 1938, shortly before her 100th birthday. It would not be wrong to say she played the system until her last breath. Amelia Dyer, the monster the system created. Our second story tells not only the tale of a killer, but simultaneously the story of a rotten and corrupt system that made it all possible. To understand Amelia Dyer, one must first look at England in 1834. For this story begins somewhere in a room where bureaucrats seated around a table, pens in hand, made their decisions. Ord. That year, the British government enacted a long-debated piece of legislation, the Poor Law Amendment Act. The justification looked reasonable on paper. The old welfare system was being abused. Many people physically capable of working had turned state assistance into a permanent way of life, and this was causing significant financial harm to the state budget. The new law stripped everyone physically capable of working of state support. Only the elderly and the disabled would be able to benefit from this assistance. It sounds logical, doesn't it? But perhaps the hardest blow of this law fell on the most vulnerable, impoverished women with illegitimate children, for the law also largely freed fathers from their maintenance obligations. Women left to raise children alone would now face two options: either work and leave their children behind, or stay home and starve. Both were situations of desperation. In one, the child would feel abandoned. In the other, hunger was inevitable. And from within this devastation, the desperation that emerged created an invaluable opportunity for people like Amelia Dyer. Baby farming sounds like a strange, even absurd term today, but in 19th century England it was a real and extremely widespread industry. For a one-time fee, they would say to the mother surrendering her child, "Don't worry, we'll take care of your child. We'll feed and raise them with love, give them a good life." Some kept that promise, but others turned it into a business model, a trade, even a machinery of mass killing. Amelia Dyer entered this business as a woman who had gotten into the trade, a widow, a mother, and a trained nurse. Having cared for her mentally ill mother since childhood, heavy responsibilities were not foreign to her. When she entered baby farming in 1869, she genuinely provided care at the start. But this protracted and draining responsibility slowly consumed her from the inside out. Her empathy dissolved and vanished. Indifference and carelessness settled in. And one day, perhaps on an evening she sat alone, she realized the money had already been collected up front. The sooner the child died, the less expense it meant for her. This calculation was put into practice through neglect, starvation, and ultimately death. For 10 years no one asked serious questions, not until local doctors noticed the abnormal death rate among children in Amelia's care. In 1879 she served 6 months in prison on charges of neglect. She then went through several stays in mental institutions. On her release she moved to Reading. She turned over a new leaf. And this time she was far more systematic, far more cold-blooded, far more merciless. She had learned. She had drawn lessons from her mistakes. This made her all the more dangerous. She created a false identity, a loving childless couple who couldn't have children of their own. Responsible and trustworthy, they wanted to offer a good life. How many mothers believed this advertisement we don't know exactly, but we know many did, because they had to believe. They genuinely had no other choice. How unfortunate for the children to have been entrusted to such people. No, and soon as she received payment, Amelia set to work. Starvation, neglect, and strangulation. A white tape measure became her signature over time, practically a brand. Rather than calling a doctor for detection of the bodies, she put the corpses in boxes and left them in the River Thames. The water would carry everything away, or so she believed. In 1896, everything collapsed. That year, a man working on the river found a suspicious box that had washed ashore. When he opened it, he was frozen in shock to find the motionless body of a baby girl. Police intervened. Detectives who patiently traced the faint writing on the package found Amelia's address. When the house was searched, everything came out. Adoption correspondence, pawnshop tickets showing she had taken children's clothing in for money, dozens of unanswered letters from anxious mothers, and the smell of decay permeating every corner. Amelia was arrested on April 4, 1896. Experts today estimate that over more than 30 years Amelia was responsible for the deaths of up to 400 children. This figure makes her one of the most prolific serial killers ever recorded. She was executed on June 10, 1896, at the age of 58. Reading the story of Amelia Dyer as merely the story of a killer is incomplete. The story also asks, if a society corners people so thoroughly, and someone emerges to exploit that desperation, who will ultimately be held accountable? The ones who paid the price were the children who died. Chaos. This story reaches us through a pamphlet published in 1654. In that era, criminal pamphlets were enormously popular. These small booklets recounting the lives and crimes of convicted criminals served both as a social moral lesson and as an entertainment format that people read with great interest. People were almost spellbound by these figures who danced with the devil, shed blood, and shattered society's norms. This fascination with true crime content never changed, only the format did. From pamphlet to newspaper, from newspaper to documentary, from documentary to podcast. Melchior Hedloff is a figure from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, known largely through his own confessions. Much of what we know about his life comes from this pamphlet, therefore we must acknowledge from the outset that some of it may have been exaggerated or distorted. Confessions obtained under torture must always be read carefully when used as historical records, but the broad outlines align very closely with the conditions of the era. Hedloff was born into poverty as a simple peasant, a sick father, a mother forced to work, an empty purse. He ran away from home at a young age and joined dangerous gangs to survive. At that exact time, the 30 Years' War had burned and destroyed a vast swath of Europe. The Polish-Lithuanian territory had also suffered deeply from this war. Villages had been burned, roads were unsafe, and state authority had effectively collapsed. This chaos offered someone like Hedloff an incredible degree of freedom. He joined various mercenary units. He learned skills such as setting ambushes, close combat, and the use of firearms. War gave him both a technical and a psychological education, numbing oneself to pain, instrumentalizing violence, the art of survival. When mercenary work dried up, he turned to banditry. On deserted, silent roads, he would shoot travelers with a rifle, move the bodies off the road, and steal their valuables. For each victim he killed, he would notch the stock of his rifle. He kept a tally. We don't know why. Perhaps pride, perhaps a need for control, perhaps mere habit, or perhaps simply because he was out of his mind, which makes trying to understand him all the more intriguing. But this routine eventually ceased to satisfy his needs. Ordinary robberies no longer fulfilled him. According to the most famous and most disturbing account in the pamphlet, Hedloff one day encountered a pregnant woman on the road. He was alerted by the sound of the money pouch she carried. He offered her his protection. They could cross the dangerous roads together. For a woman frightened of strangers, this offer made sense to her. She accepted. That night they lodged at an inn. In the morning the woman was gone. It should be remembered that much of the accounts in the pamphlet consist of confessions obtained under torture. Under torture a person may say many things, both the truth and what the questioner wants to hear. But this much is certain. Hedloff moved for years without being caught, committing many crimes. When caught in the act with evidence before being executed, he confessed to more than 200 murders under torture. These confessions were later transformed into that famous pamphlet, a document that entered history as partly real, partly exaggerated, and entirely sensational. He was executed in the city of Wrocław in 1654. Peter Nears, The Devil in the Shadow of the Empire. We come now to our final story, both the bloodiest and the most disturbing. Peter Nears lived within the borders of the Holy Roman Empire in the 16th century. The era was again chaotic. In the aftermath of the German Peasants' War, social order had been shattered. More than 100,000 lower-class people had lost their lives in this war. Anger toward the aristocracy had reached its peak, but as always, the poor had once again been crushed. Power remained in the hands of those at the top of society. This cycle repeated itself time and time again throughout history, and each time produced the same result: people cornered with nothing left to lose. Peter grew up in such an environment, coming from poverty with no faith or trust in the system, filled with a slowly dying anger and resentment. He initially worked as a shepherd, an ordinary, simple, invisible life. But this was not enough for him. He joined outlaws. Before long, he was not merely an ordinary member of the group, but rose to a leadership position. He built an organized gang that swept the empire's roads. Robberies, pillaging, and killings followed one another in succession. But Peter eventually went far beyond these robberies. Violence for him ceased to be a means and gradually became an end in itself, even a source of gratification. In 1577, he was captured for the first time, but he managed to escape. This escape greatly amplified the legend surrounding him. How did he go undetected for so long? How did he always manage to escape? For the people, the explanation was ready. He had made a pact with the devil. He used black magic. He could change his shape. He could become invisible. These explanations aligned perfectly with the way people thought in that era. In 16th century Europe, belief in magic and the devil was not an academic subject of debate. It was an ordinary and unavoidable part of daily life. But looking back, these supernatural powers had very practical explanations: an excellent ability to disguise himself, a reliable underground network, and an extensive knowledge of geography that made evading authority easier. Because people didn't think in those terms, they attributed it to magic. That was the era. Everything that was not understood was given a supernatural explanation. And this explanation, paradoxically, wove a genuine aura of fear around Peter. People feared him not merely as a killer, but as a nearly untouchable force. The beginning of the end came in September 1581. Peter was relaxing in a bathhouse. He was tired, feeling safe. He had been fleeing for years and had gotten away every time. But that day the other bathers recognized him. Whispers spread. Eyes followed him. When someone dared to check his belongings, they found severed human heads and hearts in his bag. He was caught, and then 3 days of savage torture began. The wheel, one of the most terrifying methods of medieval Europe, was applied. A large wooden wheel struck his body 42 times. Morning, noon, evening. Like a rhythm. Under this torture, confessions began to pour out, each more harrowing than the last. Peter Neers confessed to a total of 544 murders. Among this number were 24 pregnant women and their unborn children. Historians say that some portion of this figure may be an exaggeration born of torture, but local records and documents from the period confirm that Neers genuinely had an extremely bloody and long-standing track record. At the age of 41, he was quartered and executed in a public square. The crowd watched. Perhaps they were there to believe that something had finally ended, or perhaps simply to be spellbound. Closing. These 4 stories unfolded in vastly different eras and geographies. One in the small villages of Yugoslavia, one in the impoverished neighborhoods of Victorian England, and 2 on the desolate and lawless roads of war-ravaged Central Europe. But all of them share one thing in common: chaos, desperation, or blind trust made these crimes possible.